I was grateful when I had the opportunity as director of the Center on Women, Gender, and Public Policy, through partnerships with some fantastic Native women, several who are here today, and Native organizations, to bring my intellectual commitment to Indigenous inclusion in the Americas home to this state, to this institution, to events like these. So this event is about Native leaders and seventh generation teachings. It is also about opening our doors here at the Center on Women, Gender, and Public Policy, at the Humphrey School, and at the University of Minnesota to Native Americans. So to the Native people here today, I say welcome. In Quechua, I say haikuikui, or come in. This university is your university. And now I'm going to turn the podium over to Audrianna Goodwin of Red Lake Band of Ojibwe, also a Master's of Public Policy student here at the Humphrey School, to lead us in an opening prayer.
Bonjour, everybody. Good morning. Bonjour, Minogigi Jeb. It's a good day to be here at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. I'm honored to have been asked to say a brief prayer this morning. I am a language learner, and so I might make some mistakes along the way, but one of the first steps is actually getting up there and doing something, right? And just taking that chance and having bravery and courage to be in front of people that I don't know. I also wanted to say that this prayer that I'll be sharing with you all has been passed down from Anna Gibbs, who is from my community back home in Obashing. So again, it's great to be here, and I'm so glad that you all have been able to join us today. Bujuni mishomis washku benesi kwe nindago maingan nindudem miskwagami wezagani nindunjaba migwich wabanung jawanung giwedanung ningabianung migwich manamaki migwich awesiug migwich benesiug migwich ningosisug migwich nakomis migwich Migwich kichi manidu, migwich namadabi wad manidug, giwi du kawashig, bishini kianiuk, adapanig, wa awe asema, giminamin asema, giwi du kawashig, nakomis minawa, kichi manidu, apane, ganawe nimishig, nishomis, aho, migwich, meet you. I'll just do a brief translation. I just, thanked our relatives, the majority of our relatives. And I also asked for guidance from the spirits. And after I'm done speaking here, I have some asema that was gifted to me before I spoke, and I will go put that by the tree. Again, thank you for inviting me into this space. And I'm so grateful and honored that you are all here with us today. Miigwech, aho.
Thank you, Audrianna. So before I introduce the hosts of this event, I want to take a moment to thank our financial sponsors. This event is made possible through generous grants, both through the Bush Foundation and through the Imagine Fund here at the University of Minnesota. In addition, several units here at the University of Minnesota have contributed financially to support this day. The Department of American Indian Studies, the Institute for Advanced Study, the Human Rights Center, Race, Indigeneity, Disability, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, and the Women's Center. I also want to take a second to thank the staff here at the Humphrey who've helped to make this happen through a lot of behind the scenes work. That includes Gail Friedland, who many of you met as you came in, Tanisha White, who's sitting in the back and who's our operations manager, Bob Tessler up in the AV booth. And more than anyone else, I want to thank Jenna Hoagie, who is the research assistant for the Center on Women, Gender, and Public Policy, and has really stepped up to carry out a lot of the details of the day. So this is the second major event on Indigenous women leaders that the center has hosted, and hosted with some of the same partners. So I'd like to introduce those partners to you today. I'm going to read out about them, but please come on up. Jayme, Nevada, Nikki, All right. So Jayme Davis is a policy specialist in tribal law and in the Tribal Law and Policy Department of her tribe, the Turtle Mountain Tribe. She's also a student in the Masters of Public Affairs program here at the Humphrey School. I'm just doing brief introductions. We also have Nevada Little Wolf, who is the founder and president of 7 Teachings Minnesota, and executive director and campaign manager of Our Children Minnesota and Page Amendment. She is also in the Humphrey MPA program, Masters of Public Administration program. And we have Nikki Paretos, who is executive director of Tiwahe Foundation. And we're going to recruit her next to be a Humphrey student because we need more intrepid women going through our programs here at the Humphrey. I want to convey my deep gratitude to these women who, along with Audrianna Goodwin, who you just heard from in our opening prayer, and Ann Gargiola, who you will hear from soon, introducing Sharon Day, for their inspiration more than anything, their dedication and their time in putting together this event. This is their vision and this is their event. In 2019, we came together with some of these same women and organizations to host an event you might remember well called Indigenous Women Have Always Been Leaders. It marked the first 2 Native women elected to the US Congress and the second woman elected to statewide office, our own Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. And it was a day of celebration of leadership, of Native women's leadership that is especially strong in this region, in this state, compared to other parts of our nation, our country. That day we celebrated those women, but also Native women in tribal government, Native women in the courts, elders and youth leading in their communities in different ways. So today we continue in this spirit of celebration and go further to move Native women and Two-Spirit leader agendas forward through our focus on 7th generation teachings. So to give you more on that vision, I'm going to turn the podium now over to one of our hosts for today, Jayme Davis.
Bonjour, hihani washte, chante washte, nape chayuzape. Wakia pioyante we, Lakota Imachiapi, Jayme Davis, English Indigenous Cause. Hello, good morning, everyone. I greet you all from my heart. My Lakota name is Thunder Being Woman. My English name is Jayme Davis. I am a citizen of the Standing Rock Nation and an enrolled citizen of the Turtle Mountain Band. On behalf of the organizers, we welcome you to Leading for the 7th Generation event. We are excited to see everyone here today that's here in person and also everyone that's joining us online. Today has been a long time coming. We have been planning this event in some form since early last year of 2021. Like Christina had mentioned, many of the people that worked on creating this event worked on an event that we had back in March of 2019 called Indigenous Women Have Always Been Leaders. After that event, we got a lot of really great feedback. Most of it was like, you need to do this again. So, and we did. We had hoped to do it, in 2020, but due to COVID, that put that on hold. But again, thanks to the strength of our team leader, Christina, and the organizers here, we found our way through to today. COVID's impact wasn't only felt by having to push back the event, but like many at the time, it got us talking about if and when we come out of this pandemic, how do we make sure we don't go back to the way things were? So we started talking about our own futures and the futures of those yet to come. And as leaders, how do we lead to have a sustainable and positive impact on the future generations, which we started talking about the 7th generation principles. So today, more specifically, the 7th generation. Today, you'll hear from people who have been living and breathing this question. You'll have the opportunity to hear about our ancestors who thought about us a long time ago. You'll get answers to questions is, How long is 7 generations exactly? And where do I fit in the 7-generation lineage? How do we exemplify the true meaning of 7 generations by maintaining our integrity as Indigenous people? How do we honor and hold respect for those yet to come? We'll be discussing these topics and a lot more. Today, we'll start off with Sharon Day, who will speak about those ancestors. And then we'll move on to Dr. Henrietta Mann, who will speak on the 7 generations, thoughts and teachings. And then we have a powerhouse panel, Annette Johnson, Treasurer of the Red Lake Nation, Minnesota State Representative Heather Keeler, founder of Ginu Collective Terahuska, and CEO of Redco, Clay Klum. We'll all have a well-rounded discussion regarding leading for the 7th generation in a variety of capacities. Each session will have a question and answer portion. To end the event, we'll have final remarks from Vanessa Goodthunder and our very own Nikki Pradas. With that, I will turn it back over to Christina for additional notes before we get started with our first speaker. Thank you, Miigwech and P'liamiye.
So I will give you a couple of notes before we turn to our first keynote address. For those of you who are watching via Zoom, we welcome your questions via the Q&A function through the Zoom webinar, and our moderators will be monitoring those, and we will mix those questions in with questions from the audience. Audience members, when we get to the Q&A portion, we will be going around, Jayme and I, with wireless mics to take your questions. For those who are speaking, we do have a person captioning these proceedings live. Paula's in the back end here, and she is typing as fast as she can to capture what we are saying. So please don't speed talk, even when you ask your questions, so that she can keep up with the pace of your speaking. I am sure she's a fast typist, but we can always give her a little break from time to time. So with that, I am going to turn the podium over to Ann Garziola, who will introduce our keynote speaker. And I'll say just that Ann she provided the initial inspiration for the theme of this event of 7th generation teachings that then this group set out together to make a reality. Ann is a Humphrey School Masters of Public Policy student, and also a research assistant for the Truth Project that some of you might be familiar with. It stands for Towards Recognition and University Tribal Healing, and it seeks to begin a process of truth and reconciliation between the 11 tribes that share geography with Minnesota and the University of Minnesota. She will be introducing our keynote.
Bonjour, Mino Kikijab, and Indigenous Azabakoni Zagaganang Indujaba, Imanishiska, and Dundadis. Thank you for dealing with my reconnecting on Anishinaabe-Moan. Good morning, my name is Ann. My tribal affiliation is Bois Forte, and I grew up primarily in St. Paul. It is an incredible honor to introduce our keynote speaker today. Sharon Day is an enrolled member of the Bois Forte Band of Chippewa, a second-degree Midewin, a grandmother, and a water protector. She has served as the executive director of the Indigenous Peoples Task Force, an organization she helped found since 1990. And this organization was created to serve the needs of Indigenous people who are diagnosed with HIV and AIDS. Sharon is an award-winning author, musician, and playwright. She is a mentor to many youth through the Indigenous Peoples Task Force, Akitawan Peer Education Program, and Youth Theater. She has received numerous awards, including the Resourceful Women Award, the Gisela Nopka Award, BIHA's Women of Color Award, the National Native American AIDS Prevention Resource Center Red Ribbon Award, the Alston Bannerman Sabbatical Award, and the Spirit Aligned Legacy Fellowship for 3 years. She has been named as one of the 100 Best Loved Women by Yes Magazine. And on November 10th, 1998, the governor of the state of Minnesota and the mayors of both St. Paul and Minneapolis declared it Sharon M. Day. Sharon also leads Nabi, or water walks, walking in prayer led by Anishinaabe grandmothers. The Nabi water walks are Indigenous-led extended ceremonies to pray for the water. Every step is taken in prayer and gratitude for the water, our life-giving force. To walk for the water is to heal all of life. Miigwech for all that you do, Sharon. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Sharon Day.
My speech seems to have disappeared. Bujun Ninindwe Maganidug, Nagmamangan and Dishnakaz, Wabashashin Dodam, Chibri and down, Dishnujo Medeo, Medewanakwe and down. Thank you. I was chuckling when Anne did that introduction because when she said I was one of the 100 most loved women by Yes Magazine, that was 100 most loved lesbians. It's something that I take great pride in. It's an honor to be here with you this morning, and also an honor to be with such a distinguished guest as Dr. Henrietta Mann, who you'll hear later. And I've met Dr. Mann several times, and she is like one of the most gracious, kind women I know, as well as brilliant. So look forward to hearing her later. So today I want to speak with you about three separate topics. And the first one being our connection to our grandmothers and how our grandmothers have sustained us to be here today. And so I'll begin with my own grandmother, Effie Day. My grandmother, Effie, was my father, Clyde George Day's mother, and the only grandparent that I had the opportunity to meet. My grandmother was a tiny, brown-skinned woman who didn't like to speak English much. And she never, I never ever heard my grandmother say an unkind word about anybody. And she walked with a cane for as long as I knew, and she always wore a skirt and a scarf. Whenever she left the house, the scarf came on and off she went. And my grandmother, she experienced so many tragedies in her life. She lost my grandfather and three of her sons due to violence, and also a daughter that was lost in a boating accident. And so she had every reason to be bitter and angry, but she wasn't. My grandmother was the epitome of grace, and I hope to live long enough to be just even a little bit like her. She was 84 years old when she left this realm, but while she was here, I think for most of her life, probably 80 years, she never left northern Minnesota, probably never went past Virginia. And but when we moved to St. Paul in 1966, she would catch a ride with the minister, Wally Olson. He would drop her off sometimes and then pick her up a couple days later. And I think she even took the Greyhound once. But she maintained that connection with us, even though we had moved about 4 hours away. And I remember, getting letters from her on Christmas Eve and on, Good Friday. And I'd always wonder, how did she manage that? How did she manage for me to get those letters on Christmas Eve? And and it wasn't just, the grandchildren that she stayed connected with, but the great grandchildren. And so when my daughters were born, as every young mother does, when they started school, I would send my grandmother in the mail, their school picture, right? The little picture. And I remember they were probably about 7, 8 years old, and she came to visit. And we were sitting at the kitchen table at my mother's house, and she pulled out her, envelope from her purse. And then she put those pictures on the table. And I have to tell you, like that was so, it meant so much to me that she didn't just take those pictures and, put them away someplace. Like she carried them with her. And so I remember my oldest daughter came running in the house, and while grandma was sitting at the kitchen table, and she came in and she said, and everyone said, "You're supposed to be outside. You're supposed to be outside playing, watching the little kids." And she said, "No, I have something to say." And she looked at my grandmother and she said, "No, Kumis." And the look on my grandmother's face was so, just to hear, one of her great grandchildren say a few words. So, I think that we have survived because our grandmothers loved us and our great grandmothers loved us. And I'll give you just another example. They loved us before we were here. So I have a grandson. Many of you who know me personally know that I raised my oldest grandson, Kirby. And when he was a baby, he had severe asthma. So he was in and out of the hospitals. And of course, we wanted to have his naming right away. And when my father was alive, he named my daughters. And so we took tobacco and we went up to Bois Fort, which is about 4 hours from here. And we offered tobacco to somebody there who had the authority to give names. And she accepted the tobacco. And so she said, "I will let you know when I have the name," when she had dreamt the name, when she had fetched that name that already belonged to him. And so time went by and we got a phone call from her son. He said, "My mom has a name." So we were so excited. We drove up there. And when we got there, she was gone. And so we went back home again. And then a little while later, he called again and he said, "She has a name and she wishes for you to come." So we went and we found her, and she said, "Come back at daybreak because that's when I do my naming ceremony." So we went to where we were staying and we made the feast, wild rice, walleye, and some blueberries and corn, and we covered it, with a cloth and had it in a bowl. And so we went, it's just a little past daybreak. And when we got to her house, there was no answer. And so we thought, is she not answering the door because we're late? And so anyhow, she wasn't there. And so we saw her son, he said, "I think it's okay to ask somebody else." But we were really devastated because this little guy was so sickly. And so on our way home, it was pretty quiet. This was pre-cell phones. But when I got home, my sister Doreen called. And she said, Papa Jay called and he said he needs to name Kirby. And it was like that same, we walked in the house, the phone rang, and it was my sister. And I said, "Well, when?" And she said, "Next Sunday." So Papa Jay came and he named Kirby. And when he talked about naming him, he said, "I dreamt about him when I was a young man." And he saw him and he dreamt the name for him. And I said, "Well, how long ago was that, Papa Jay?" And he said, "I was probably about 10 or 11. So how could this, man, 70 years before my grandson was even born, dream about him?" But he did. And I think that's how our grandparents, they have that love for us even before we're born. My grandson, by the way, was doctored by another medicine man who's traveled on out to William Wilson, and he never had another asthma attack. Has never used a nebulizer um, since he was 2.5 years old, and so so our grandparents loved us before we were born, and I think that that dreaming of those names, that's a very spiritual aspect, but there's also a physical aspect, right? So um, when we are born as females, we have all the eggs we're ever going to have at the time of birth, and so we had them before birth, right? And so while we're before we're born, there's a transfer of blood cells back and forth between us and our mother. and in that way, we also carry the DNA of our grandmothers directly in our blood. So in this way, our grandmothers carried us as well, right? And this is also evidenced in some of our teachings. When we make a cradle board, there's a lace that begins at one end, and it crisscrosses all the way down to the bottom, and then it goes back up again, right, and comes out the other side. And that is the same sign for DNA, but that also connects us all the way to our ancestors, to the beginning of time and to the future, into infinity. So, which brings me also to the subject of blood quantum. So today, many tribes, including the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, are revising their constitutions, and enrollment, of course, is a big issue. Enrollment in the Minnesota Chippewa tribe is based on blood quantum, and that you have to be at least a quarter of your specific reservation to be enrolled. I think that, excuse me, I think it doesn't matter what the color of your skin is, or the texture of your hair, or the color of your eyes. If you are born from ancestors who are Ojibwe, Lakota, Haudenosaunee, Pueblo, Taino, you are of that blood, and nothing can change that. And our blood memory carries not only the trauma from our ancestors, but also the joy our ancestors felt. So no one can deny that right now we are in a time of great trauma. In this last year, I've lost 6 individuals close to me. If I go back another 2 years, I can add 2 of my teachers. And I know that many of you have had that similar experiences. We're all losing people we love, people we hold dear, and our elders, our historians, and our teachers. And some of this loss is due to COVID, but also to other things like drug overdoses, alcoholism, heart disease, and cancer. And it makes me wonder, when we are losing so many of our people, why would we continue to push them out of our nations? When we look back at history, at all the nations in the world who were strong saw their people as resources. And when they didn't have very many, they went out and found some, they brought people into their nation. And we really must, as we revise these constitutions, not only consider eliminating this use of blood quantum as a measure of who is from that nation, and because we will be extinct as a people if we continue to simply use that as an indication of who is a citizen of our nation. The other thing, I think, as we look at tribal constitutions, We could take a look at what's happening with indigenous people around the world. The Maori people in Bolivia, they look at the water as a living entity. They look at the land as a living entity and have included that in their constitutions. So I think that, our tribal governments are based on the Indian Reorganization Act. And as long as we continue to follow the laws set forth by the colonizers, we will continue on this sort of path towards destruction for our people. We tribal people, we really are the Ukrainians of this hemisphere. And nothing can separate our bloodlines, our heart lines, our song lines, our ceremonial lines. We are the people of our tribal nations, and we have stood up as courageously and as bravely as the Ukrainians are standing up for their homelands today. So, I've been thinking a lot about, even in the depths of my own grief and despair, how did the people, our great grandparents, your great grandparents, move forward out of the depths of despair they must have felt in the late 1800s or 1900s, a time when our people had been removed to reservations, moved to land that might have been unfamiliar to them, land that was not large enough, did not have enough resources to sustain all the people, especially if they were nations that were hunters and gatherers. And even agrarian nations did not have enough land to grow the food to feed their families. We were all victims of massacres, biological warfare, and starvation. They'd kill the buffalo herds, cut down the trees, and there must have been great despair and a deep, deep depression. So how did they move forward? 1890 they passed a law forbidding us from practicing our religions. It was the time of the last Indian War, which was actually fought right here in Minnesota. I think, well, how did they move forward? Because there are some days, really myself, when there's so much grief, and I know, like, you have to put one foot in front of the other, right, and continue to move forward. And I think maybe that's what our ancestors did. Maybe they just simply lived their lives. In this time of year, they were tapping their maple trees. They went foraging. In the fall, they harvested wild rice and set snares for the waboos in winter. They cut wood to keep themselves warm, used the rabbit fur for mittens and the deer hide for leggings and moccasins. And when they picked that first odaman in the spring, and they tasted that red berry shaped like a heart, I think they knew they were going to be okay. I like to think that I'm here today because my great grandparents loved each other, and they loved me before I was born. And it is that love that moves us forward. And I think it was doing those things that they need to do. And so, a week ago Saturday, I went out and tapped my maple trees. And tomorrow we'll not a lot of sap this year, but we'll boil what we have, and we'll make maple syrup. So little things, going out, feeding the chickens, feeding those goats that I have, those 2 goats I have, and just doing those everyday things, help to move us forward, and so and have a little bit of hope, right? Hope for the future. So today we need hope, and we need to be industrious like our ancestors were. Dream, and then believe in that dream. follow our teachings, those 7 grandfather teachings. Be kind, be loving, be generous, be courageous, be honest, be humble, learn and seek wisdom. I would say, and wisdom is different than knowledge, right? One can know the most complex mathematical equations, but unless that math helps them to know the formula to figure out how much canvas you need to cover a lodge 50 feet wide and 35 feet, 50 feet long and 35 feet wide and 14 feet tall, it doesn't do you much good. And so, many times I have students who are in graduate school and they will come and ask me a question. How do you do this? How do you do that? And what I encourage them to do is for every year that you have studied to get your master's degree or your doctorate, that's how many years you need to go to your ceremonies, so that you not only have that knowledge from the academy, but you have that knowledge where you know that when you build a sweat lodge, when you look up, you're going to see a star on the inside, right? So we need to reconnect with our tribal values, with the land, with the water, with the animals, with the birds, with the eagles. I think that for me, sovereignty means the agency, that I have the agency to create relationships, reciprocal relationships. So it's as simple as what I take care of the chickens, right? I feed them. I make sure the coyotes don't get them. I go out in the winter and break that ice, take them warm water so they can drink when it's 20 below. The same thing with the goats. I take care of them so the coyotes don't get them. And I feed them, and they in turn fertilize our garden. And the chickens give me eggs, which I give to Paul, who comes and helps take care of the farm. That is a reciprocal relationship, right? And those are the kind of relationships we need to create. And that is sovereignty, true sovereignty, having the ability, the agency to make those kind of relationships. And when we look at, those treaties, that's what they said. Although we're the only ones that upheld our portion of the treaties. When I wake up in the morning these days and I go outside, I can hear the Canadian geese flying north, and we have a little pond, and they land there and they stay there a bit, and soon the sandhill cranes will be sounding their voices. And so, this summer, I encourage you to, go pick some sage for your own use. Give some to the elders who might not be able to venture out as easily anymore. Plant some food. Even if it's peppers and tomatoes, they're really hard to kill, right? They're really easy to grow. Put your hands in the earth, harvest some wild rice, and you will be glad you did. When we drink water, we are drinking the same water our grandparents and our ancestors drank since the beginning of time. The environmental groups, they talk about water as a resource. They talk about it as, the science talks about it as being H2O, right? That's what they say it is. Hydrogen and 2 parts oxygen. We see water as a living entity. And so do most indigenous people around the world. And when we go on a water walk and maybe walk, we go to the source of the river, the headwaters, and we have ceremony, and we speak to those grandmothers that sit in that Medewabu realm in Atavima Netwe Vikwe Kokomisanan and Gaye, Nisaway, Gamikwe. They are the guardians of the water, and we speak to them and we offer our sema. We gather that water and we offer those petitions. We sing those water songs. And as we walk along the river silently, we are speaking to those water spirits. And many times people say to me, when you're walking a river, are you trying to raise awareness? And I say to them, no, I'm smarter than that. If I want to raise awareness, I would raise a lot of money and I'd hire a PR firm, right? And I'd have a campaign about the water. No, that's not what we're doing. What we're doing is we're speaking to the spirit of that water. And we're telling that water, we love you, we thank you, we respect you, and please forgive us. And I think it's all of our responsibility as adults to do as little damage as we can, in the hopes that the next generation will pick up where we left off and do better than we did. You know, my generation, I grew up in the 60s, we thought we were going to change the world. And we did protest after protest after protest, and wars, civil rights, all of those things. And we didn't change the world. And after George Floyd, you know, when I seen the young people in the streets marching, you know, those of us who had worked all of our lives on these issues, we were pretty much sidelined because of COVID. But when I seen my grandchildren out there marching, and everybody, whether it's the University of Minnesota, the city of Minneapolis, the state of Minnesota, everybody said we were going to do something. We're going to have police reform. Every foundation said, you know, they know where they got their money from, right? From our resources. They all said they were going to do something. And we've watched them all renege on the things that they said, or do such very little. It takes more than a land acknowledgement to everywhere, North, Central, and South America, you are on indigenous land. It's good to recognize that, but uphold those treaties, uphold that other half of those treaties. Those are the kinds of things we need. And so, so I have hopes in the next generation. You know, we see these young children today, like, you know, they're all learning their language. You know, they're I see some of their posts on Facebook, and they're so you know, they're so strong and determined. That's what we need. So we are the ancestors. When we drink that water that they drank, that water's been here forever. This water in this plastic container, it's been here forever. This is the same water all of our ancestors drank. And you know, and when we're gone, you know, we will feed the earth. And in that way, we are the ancestors, and we're also the ancestors yet to come. So be loving, be kind, and I'll try to do the same. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Sharon. Those words were beautiful. Thank you for sharing stories about your own grandmother and your grandson. I think that that really touched my heart. So Miigwech. I think we're going to do a short Q&A. So if the audience has questions, Christina and Jayme, I believe, will be walking around with mics. Oh, Christina.
Thank you for your beautiful words. I just, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I live about a mile from the Mississippi River. And it's so powerful. And I did see you with some younger people do some plays a few years ago, and it just connected the dots. But I never took, I've studied in higher educational institutions, so I've never taken those same amount of years to do this, but I thought something that I don't know is the connection to the water. And I'm starting to realize that, and the mouths of where these rivers come from and how they flow to our nations or through our nations. And that is something that I'd ask you to, if you could talk about that, like the mouth of these, of like the Mississippi River and its relevance. And I know that would be a long time to explain, but maybe just to say something to.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So, you know, we are so fortunate to live in this land where the Mississippi originates. And if you've never been to the headwaters, you know, please go. It's only about a 3.5 hour drive. But you know, the headwaters. So, you know, Ojibwe, you know, the word for love is zage, and that means you know, to nurture, right? And the word for the headwaters is similar. It means also the place where all life comes to be nurtured. And that's the way, the place where the mouth of the river is where all life would go to be nurtured. But when you look at the Mississippi River today, the headwaters is still so beautiful. And as the river flows down to the Twin Cities, it's still in fairly good shape. And when we walked the Mississippi River in 2013, we gathered the water there. We gathered enough and we could drink that water. And as we took enough to make sure that we had enough to last all the way till we got to the Gulf, you know, taking into consideration evaporation, we had to refill the pail often. Wind would cause evaporation and the heat in the south. So we gathered quite a bit, and we also had enough for ceremonies along the way. And when we got to St. Louis, Cahokia, we walked up to Monk's Mound, and that mound is 100 feet tall, and we had ceremony there. And the local tribal people that came, you know, when we offered them the water to drink, you know, they were scared because even here in the Twin Cities, without the water being processed, who would drink directly out of the Mississippi? But at the headwaters, you can still drink the water there. And the Mississippi is still pretty good until you get to the Minnesota River. And if you took an aerial view of the Mississippi and the confluence with the Minnesota, you could see the difference, because the Minnesota River, 10,000 tons of fertilizer get used in that Minnesota River Valley every year. And then this is what happens. So the farmers have tiling right under their fields. And so they put all the fertilizer on the fields, and then the rains come. And they don't want their fields to be too wet for planting. So they open the tile drainage system, and the water flows into the Minnesota River. And then as it comes down, there's a lot of erosion. So there's a lot of sediment. And so by the time it hits the Mississippi River, you cannot drink the water anymore. And in Hastings, in Red Wing and further south, if you have a private well, they do not give that water to babies because it will cause blue baby syndrome. And so, and then as it continues on down, it just gets worse and worse. But so when we carried the water and we start every morning with the ceremony and songs, and then we carry the water in silence because you can't hear that hawk calling to you, or you can't hear that horse calling you, or see the bluebirds and calling if you're listening to yourself talk or you have earbuds, right? That's all you hear then. So I want people to really, when they're walking, to be in the moment with everything around them, to hear the wind blowing, and to make that reconnection, with the land, the animals, and the earth, and especially the Nabi. So we've walked probably about 20 rivers since 2011. And of course, who I learned all of this from was Josephine Mandam and Iban, and Bidasike Iban. She was an inspiration, and I continue to do this work in honor of Bidasike and for our waters. And sometimes women will say to me, like, I can't remember that water song, because in our lodge, we have probably seven separate water songs. And the water songs that we sing on the walk are not those songs. But sometimes Made Koi will say to me, like, I can't remember that song. Can't remember that water song. Like, go to the river, go to a spring, put your sama down, gather some water, and you will remember those songs. And that's just, that's just the way it works. So, we've taken many young people with us on these walks. Most of the Goodwin Youth Theater folks have came with us. And if you go to our website, nibiwalk.org, you'll see the walks that we have planned for this summer.
Thank you. I think we may have time for one more question.
I'll try to give a shorter answer.
No.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you, Miigwech, for inviting me, and look forward to hearing the rest of the speakers.
Miigwech, Sharon, thank you so much.